All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at Robert Greene's incredibly provocative book, The 48 Laws of Power. Right off the bat, in the preface, Greene hits us with a stark truth about human nature. The feeling of having no power over people and events is, well, it's unbearable. When we feel totally helpless, we feel completely miserable. But here's the catch. In today's world, overtly seeking power or acting openly power-hungry, that's dangerous. We all have to seem fair, decent, and democratic. So, we're left with this crazy paradox where we have to be totally congenial on the outside, yet deeply cunning on the inside.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, hey, I can just opt out, right? I'll just be a good, honest person and leave the scheming to everybody else. Well, Greene argues that this is actually a massive illusion. According to the text, the world is essentially a giant scheming court, and we are all trapped inside it. There's literally no use in trying to opt out. In fact, attempting to do so is just going to render you powerless, which, as we just established, will only make you miserable.
And this brings us to a really fascinating point about these so-called non-players. Greene warns us to watch out for people who constantly flaunt their moral qualities, their piety, or their exquisite sense of justice. Because remember, all humans hunger for power. So these big displays, they're often just throwing dust in our eyes. These people are using moral superiority as a brilliant disguise for their own very subtle manipulation.
Let's actually break down how these non-players operate in the real world. Greene points out that demanding absolute equality, for example, is often a super calculated strategy to redistribute rewards and suppress people who naturally excel. And weaponizing brutal, perfect honesty, that's not always noble. A lot of times, it's just a subtle form of coercion meant to convince people of how selfless they are. And faking innocence or weakness, that is a highly effective way to gain sympathy and exert control without ever looking power-hungry. Basically, they're playing the game just as hard as anyone else. They just have a way better disguise. Section 1. The Courtier's Dilemma, Navigating the Modern Court. To make sense of this, Greene uses the old aristocratic court as a historical parallel for modern society, and it perfectly captures the paradox you face every single day. Outwardly, you absolutely have to look civilized, decent, and fair. Overt power moves are a huge red flag, but inwardly, you have to be incredibly cunning and strategic. You're constantly navigating this boiling cauldron of dark emotions, like greed and envy, that are just simmering beneath our refined society. It sounds exhausting, sure, but as Greene quotes Napoleon, you really have to place your iron hand inside a velvet glove.
Section 2. Foundational Skills, Mastering Your Emotions.
So before you can even think about applying any of Greene's laws, you've got to do some serious internal work. The absolute biggest roadblock to power: emotional responses. Anger, as highlighted here, is the most destructive emotion of all. Why? Because it completely clouds your reason. If you can't see a situation clearly, you can't respond with any real control. Plus, showing your anger has this terrible ripple effect. It makes the situation chaotic, and it actually fires up your enemy's resolve. The text points out that if you really want to destroy an enemy, it's way better to keep them off guard by faking friendliness than by blowing your top and showing your true anger. To keep those emotions in check, Greene introduces this really cool concept, the Janus effect. It's named after Janus, the two-faced Roman deity who guarded gates. You have to develop this ability. This means you've got to simultaneously study the past, not to hold grudges, but to actually educate yourself and break your bad habits, while meticulously looking toward the future. You have to calculate every possible permutation and pitfall. That way, literally nothing catches you by surprise. Section 3. The Art of Deception and Patience.
Okay, so once you've got a handle on your internal emotions, you have to master your outward appearance. While the text explicitly calls out deception as your most potent weapon, it pairs it with a mandatory defensive skill: patience. Greene notes that patience is your crucial shield. It protects you from making those moronic, hasty blunders we all regret. Impatience only ever makes you look weak. If you can step back, control your emotions, and just give things time to develop naturally, you position yourself with a godlike advantage over everybody else.
Section 4. The Laws in Action. With that philosophical groundwork laid out, let's look at how this Machiavellian game is actually played in reality. We're going to start with the very first and probably the most famous rule in the entire text. Law 1. Never outshine the master. It is incredibly tempting, right? You want to show off your talents to impress your boss or the people above you. But Greene argues that going too far with this totally backfires. It just inspires fear and insecurity in your superiors.
To really climb the ladder, you always have to make the people above you feel comfortably superior. You literally have to make your masters appear more brilliant than they actually are, even if it means purposely dimming your own light so theirs shines brighter. Jumping ahead a bit, we hit some truly ruthless strategies for dealing with active threats to your power. Law 15 is brutal, but crystal clear. Crush your enemy totally. Drawing on history, the author warns that stopping halfway is a massive mistake. If you leave even one tiny ember alight, no matter how dimly it's smoldering, a fire will eventually break out. An opponent who is left with any hope at all is going to recover, and they're going to seek revenge. So to secure your position, an enemy has to be neutralized completely. And that means not just in body, but in spirit.
But hey, what if you're not the one calling the shots? What happens when you are the weaker player on the board?
That is exactly where Law 22 comes in. Use the surrender tactic. If you're outmatched, don't just fight for the sake of honor. The text suggests this brilliant psychological pivot. Transform your weakness into power by surrendering first. Yielding completely denies your opponent the satisfaction of actually fighting and defeating you. It infuriates them, it unsettles them, and most importantly, it buys you the precious time you need to recover, regroup, and just wait for their power to naturally fade. And finally, we reach the very end of the list, number 48. This is really the culmination of the author's entire thesis on power. Law 48. Assume formlessness. Greene wraps things up by explaining that having a rigid, highly visible plan is incredibly dangerous. Why? Because it gives your enemy a concrete target to attack. Instead, you have to accept that absolutely nothing is certain. No law is permanently fixed. You have to protect yourself by being as fluid and formless as water. By constantly adapting and staying on the move, you become impossible to grasp, and therefore, totally impossible to defeat. Section 5. An amoral perspective.
To really digest this whole explainer, we have to understand the core lens through which Greene views human interaction. This quote nails it. He insists that power is essentially amoral. There is no good or bad in this arena. There are only circumstances. You have to train your brain to focus solely on outward circumstances and tangible results. You have to ignore the distraction of someone's sweet or good intentions, because intentions are so often just used to cloud judgment and deceive us. You measure your opponent strictly by the effects of their moves.
Which leaves us right here. The source text makes it very clear the world is a giant, scheming court, and honestly, none of us can truly escape it. So, knowing that everyone around you is playing some version of this exact game, how are you going to choose to navigate your very next interaction? Are you going to deny the game exists, bumble your way through it, or are you ready to master the velvet glove? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I will leave you to ponder that exact question.